Welcome to the Irish NFL Show's draft preview in association with QuinnBet. We're counting down the picks from number 16 to the number 1 overall pick. Good evening and a belated happy Easter to every one of you who's watching us on the live stream tonight on IrishNFLshow.com, on X, on Twitch, on Instagram, and on YouTube. We have a live draft show coming up, incidentally, on Thursday night. That's into Friday morning, really, from 1 a.m. That's brought to you by our partner, Buskers on the Ball and Temple Bar in Dublin. We'll be in Buskers for the second annual Irish NFL Show draft special. Very much looking forward to that. You can check out the recording of last week's show, incidentally, on YouTube to get our take on picks 32 to 17 in the first round, or you can listen back to the podcast on whichever is your platform of choice. Right now, though, we're all either on sugar highs or on mad come downs after gorging ourselves over the weekend. We'll try and keep it sweet as we tick through the picks. Brian, that's probably me talking rather than the lads. I don't know how fond you are of your Easter eggs, lads, but I know I was like the nun and Father Ted at one stage. Just not what it looks like. Brian O'Leary, Kieran O'Donovan, Shane Brennan, Kieran Boyle, and me, Conor Brophy, with you as we look at what we think each team is likely to do and who's going to go where. We're going to start at number 16 with the Arizona Cardinals, Kieran Boyle. A lot of speculation that they're going to go defense. They seem to be fairly well set along their defensive front, so they may pick in the secondary. Kieran's looking frozen there, so we might come back to that one. Or Brian, if you want to have a stab at the Arizona Cardinals at 16.
I'll let Kieran come back in and give the players in which he thinks is probably the most fruitful players in terms of what's on the listing. I was looking at this and I was thinking offensive line. I think Kyler Murray is fantastic in his own right in terms of entertainment, levels of scrambling around and doing his utmost to continue the plays. But I also think at times he's scrambling for his life because unfortunately he's been chased and harassed because the offensive line isn't doing a number for him in terms of helping him out. So I'm going to suggest to go offensive line. But Kieran is back now, so let's bring him in. He is indeed back, or is he back? Right.
Kieran, are you there? We were just talking about the Cardinals and we've lost you again, right? Do you know what?
Yeah, there we go.
Abby's back in. I stepped in against like Lanigan's ball here. Kieran, you're on the clock. And unless we have a trade at 16, the Cardinals
indeed
largely expected to pick defense. Brian took a flyer that they may go and do something slightly counterintuitive, or not counterintuitive, but against what a lot of the consensus forecasts have said and go offensive line. Do you see them doing that, or do you think they'll address the secondary? Well, what the broadband is doing in Jacksonville, it's still getting over Liam Cohen's appointment as coach there, right? Brian, you know what? We'll move on up to the Falcons. You were slated to have a look at what the Falcons. The consensus pick there is Mykel Williams, the edge rusher out of Georgia. What do you see them doing?
I think they might try it out. In fact, Conor, I said it last week. We're closing out the show last week and we're discussing potential moves. I think they're an interesting team because of where they're sitting. They've only got 5 picks in total for the entirety of the draft, so you would like to think that the GM will consider trying to stockpile a few picks and give them a little bit, extra options over the course of the 3 days. And then the Kirk Cousins thing is an interesting one. I see today some speculation now that we're getting to a stage where potentially there could be a trade in the offing, whether it happens pre or after draft. But I think the stumbling block is trying to get a team to absorb $20 million on their cap in terms of taking Kirk Cousins. But I wonder, would a Cousins trade take place on the night if something wasn't going the way of a team, or if they felt like that quarterback wasn't going to drop? In terms of players, defensive edge, defensive line has been I suppose a bone of contention for some time with this team. Mike Green is one that I thought might be in the offing.
They haven't had a double-digit sack. They haven't had a player record double-digit sack in a season, I think, for 7 seasons. It's one of the longest such spells in the NFL at the moment. They have a big vacancy there for a quality edge rusher.
Yeah, I mean, how many times did we see this team last year? How many times have we actually spoke about this team in the NFC South as a team that should win the division, but they seem to trip themselves up over the course of the season, and predominantly that tends to be on defense. I know Kirk Cousins had a bit of a slump last year in terms of interceptions, but even the last game of the season against the Panthers at home, gave up in the region of 40 points. Like, the defense has been a problem. They're exciting to watch because you're getting these high-scoring games, but ultimately they seem to come up short, and a lot of that's down to their defense. Another player, Mykel Williams, secondary, thought maybe that's one in the offing, but certainly think it's a defensive player. But up front, as you said, the sack numbers tell a lot. I think they'll go and try solidify someone on defensive line.
Shane, the Colts are up at 14. Chris Ballard, the GM, has already hinted the tight end is a huge priority for them. So you would think if Colson Loveland is available at 14, that there's a reason why he's the consensus pick. Is that the way you see it going?
I definitely feel like that a huge chunk of Indianapolis fans spent this Easter weekend praying to whatever God or whatever higher power that they worship, that the Colts will somehow still be able to get either Tyler Warren or Colston Loveland in the first round of the draft at picking at 14, because tight end is quite clearly the place where they can fix the easiest in the first round, because especially considering the tight end room last year didn't even get 500 yards in total yardage. The problem here, though, is the way I'm looking at the way this draft is cutting up. I don't think that either Tyler Warren or Colston Loveland will be available by the time we get to 14. Are we looking at the Colts to trade up? I don't think so. Will they try to trade out? I don't think so. So for that reason, I think that Jahad Campbell, linebacker from Alabama, would be the kind of person that will get in. You look at the list of the Colts needs. Second on that is quite clearly linebacker. And more importantly, they need game changers on defense. You've seen so many times last year when the game is in the balance in a very winnable division where they just could not get the proper turnover, the proper interception, something to actually change the game. I think Jahad Campbell could be that person if they can't get a tight end at this position, which I have a funny feeling they won't be able to.
Kieran O'Donovan, the Miami Dolphins are unlucky 13 and unlucky with the retirement of Teron Armstead, which has nudged a lot of people into thinking that they may go offensive line.
Yeah, I think Calvin Banks Jr. is the consensus pick, the offensive tackle. I think, I think it's a toss-up between offense and defensive line because, okay, you look at a team's need, the biggest needs amongst the team. Obviously, keeping the quarterback, keeping Tua upright is a serious concern for the Dolphins going forward. But when you look at it, when you think back to the last couple of seasons, what has been the knock on the Miami Dolphins? It's that even though on paper, I was looking at it today again, they were top 10 defense on paper in a lot of statistics through the season last year. But when push came to shove, it was the same old problem. They were soft. They were absolutely soft. And I listened to Mike Flory during the week, and they were talking about having to shore up the defense, go into the trenches on the defensive side of the ball, and just get some nasty linemen to stop the rot there in terms of those big, those games and those in the cold conditions when you have to have it. And the Dolphins are an interesting team because look, Chris Greer came out this week and he said that they're not in a rebuild, that they're built to win. He gave a lot of party lines, but I think the walls are closing in on the Dolphins. I actually think the Dolphins are one team that are going to absolutely fall over the cliff this year. I think they've got too many needs. I think the Tyreek Hill situation is a mess. They may or may not trade him away. Again, Greer was, he was speculating that they need
this is an interesting one, Kieran, as you say, because the Dolphins have quite like the Bengals. Actually, they've sneakily committed quite a lot of their cap to a small number of players, two of whom want out of town. Jalen Ramsey doesn't want to be there, and Tyreek Hill clearly doesn't want to be there. That does not speak well of the regime under McDaniel, who quietly seems to be very much on the hot seat.
I've been, you say quietly, I've been critical of him all throughout last season. I think he's one of these guys who's, yes, great offensive mind. And I've been on record a few times saying a great offensive mind or a great positional coach or a coordinator does not necessarily make a great head coach. And I don't think there's enough substance with Mike McDaniel as there is nonsense, really. The kind of the soft approach, the kind of friendly approach that he has. I think, again, Florio said during the week, he's too nice in ways. He needs to make a lot of his players take more accountability for what goes on in that locker room, and that soft persona that they've given. I think he's first and foremost.
I love it from the frozen tundra there. That's the Packer fan coming through, the old curly Lambo, old school. What the hell is going on here? There's none of the arm around the shoulder in Green Bay, I tell you.
That's the Cork GA coming through now. So none of this soft thing. Get in there. None of this. I like it.
Why he's no relation.
I'm just angry after the weekend. That's my problem. Okay, so let's enough of the Cork talk for tonight. Let me quietly stew over that for the week.
Connor, quick one. Does Kieran not get the memo? These rants aren't supposed to take place until August when we're about to go into the season, and someone goes off them. No, don't expect that on the week of the draft.
Kieran Boyle, how about them Cowboys at 12?
About them Cowboys is right. I mean, they need a lot. We saw what they had last year, and it wasn't a lot. They were very deficient on the running back and wide receiver side. I mean, being smart, Jerry should start working on the corners. and probably some of the linebackers. But Jerry being Jerry, I can see a big splash coming up. I can see the way a lot of these players are lining up. I can see a big rush on edges in the first, probably up in the top 10. So I think Mr. Genty's going to fall to 12, and I think Jerry's going to jump all over it. Jerry loves shiny objects. He loves beautiful things, and he wants to bring all these things to Arlington. And Jerry's getting up there. He's no spring chicken anymore. The years are running out, and he's got to make a splash. You saw a lot of teams going into Arlington and almost outnumbering the Cowboys fans in that stadium. He needs to start making a splash again, and I think he's going to go for somebody like Genty. He's got to This is a franchise that has been synonymous with quality running backs, from Emmitt Smith to Zeke to DeMarco Murray, even back to Herschel Walker. I can see Jerry. I can see Genty falling, which is why I think the Cowboys make sense. But this kid Genty we've all seen the highlights, just a human highlight reel. 29 touchdowns in 2024. It's an astonishing number, and he ran all over. Granted, the opposition wasn't the strongest. He wasn't playing in the SEC or even the ACC, but he was running the ball up and down people's throats, and just some outstanding, physical traits that he has. 374 carries, 2,600 yards. These are numbers that are phenomenal. They're out of this world. And he's, along with what Saquon did last year, he kind of breathed life back into the running back narrative. And I think that's, along with a couple other players, we might talk about a little later. I think the running back is now firmly back in the spotlight. And I think Jerry's going to make the splash with Genty at 12.
The 49ers, Brian, pick at 11. A lot of areas that probably need to be addressed. One of the more glaring ones, post the departure of Charvarius Ward, you would think is in the secondary. Is that where you see them picking?
Yeah, that's where I have him going. Will Johnson, JD Barron, they're the two players I've been looking at in terms of the number of different variations of mock drafts, and all the different people across the board seem to be consistent with those two names. They're two ones that stand out. I would say, speaking to 49ers fans, it's been a difficult offseason. A lot of disgruntlement about the number of players that have left, and they still have this Brock Purdy contract hanging over their heads. But is this the most important, just as a broader question, for the conversation, probably in another show, but is this the most important draft in which John Lynch has had in quite some time, probably going back as far as when he did the Trey Lance deal, because there's so much on the table now for this team. They got to get back. They got to get back challenging the division, and this is a difficult year for them. But that's where I think they'll go. But it's a bigger conversation to be had in this team.
Indeed, the Bears Shane pick at 10. It's interesting if Kieran Boyle sees Genty falling and the Cowboys getting him. I'd be surprised if he got past Ben Johnson at 10 personally, if he was available. Although all the talk has been linking the Bears with a tight end, either Colston Loveland or Tyler Warren, delete as appropriate. But one way or the other, everybody sees the Bears going offense.
Yeah, it's interesting though, because roughly this time last week we were breaking down the Houston Texans and saying, well, what do they need to do? They need to pick an offensive lineman, because that is their biggest place of need. And you mentioned there, Connor, last week we talked with the Texans. Who's worse than the Texans in terms of protecting the quarterback? It's the Chicago Bears. And for most of this draft process, that's what I thought is where it's going. But the conversation has definitely shifted in terms of picking up Tyler Warren if they can get him, running back if they can get him. But I don't know. I struggle. Firstly, I'm not quite sure how far down the draft we can see. Do we see Ashton Genty or Colston Loveland or Tyler Warren fall down? But secondly, when there's a decent crew of O-linemen there, and we don't know out of Armand Membu, Kevin Banks, Will Campbell, even Ozzie Trapillo from Boston College, who from that crop will still be available by the time the Bears are sitting down to look at this at number 10. At what point do the Bears sit back and say, let's just make the smart decision here? Because yes, the skill players are important. The tight end will be a nice thing to have in the room. A running back would be a nice thing for Ben Johnson to work with, as you mentioned. But surely the offensive line is the first place that you need to fix.
They spent a fortune on it in free agency.
Yeah, still though. Why do we have to wait for the second or the third round to even start thinking about either bringing in backups or trying to find a way.
But
to
I
get in.
suppose it depends on your view on the quality of linemen available in the draft. Like, I haven't heard outside of Membo and Campbell anybody really having their praises sung, whereas it seems to be a very strong draft for D tackles. Now, maybe you see the Bears going D-line. That wouldn't be nuts. And I've heard it suggested that maybe they look to add a little bit of depth at pass rusher. You can never have too many pass rushers, and if it happens that you have a Michael Williams or similar available, they could potentially go there. But it is an interesting conversation, and maybe it's not a slam dunk, as a lot of the mock drafts seem to have suggested that it's either Warren or Loveland.
Yeah, and look, again, in my mock draft, I have both Warren and Loveland being picked by the time we get here, which may not actually happen by the time we get to 10, which is why I picked Will Campbell as being the offensive tackle that the Bears will plug in there, because of skilled players might be taken earlier. But I could see both sides of the argument, but I definitely think that unless there is an exceptional talent that the Bears are deciding to take the best person off the board, they just need to go back in. And yes, they've made trades, they've improved the offensive line in the offseason, but I definitely think that because it's such a key area of development that the Bears need, not just for this season, but for the next 3, 4, 5 seasons, it wouldn't be an unwise pick.
Kieran, by the time we get to 9 on draft night, there's going to be a frisson of tension in the room, because nobody really knows what the New Orleans Saints are going to do. They could go quarterback, depending on what way the draft board falls. They could trade out of that pick, or they might stand pat and take the best player available. All of these options very much on the table in New Orleans.
Yeah, well, when the news broke about Derek Carr and his injury, I think the Saints became one of the most interesting teams in the draft, because what became, I would say, glaringly obvious was that they have a need now at quarterback. It's just where they want to take a quarterback is now the question. There's been a lot of talk, and again, we're giving away our mock drafts here, but last week there was such a hype on Shedeur Sanders going to New Orleans. I had him firmly at the number 9 pick, and I just thought it was going to be as simple as that. But the more I'm reading, I'm hearing a lot about the fact that the Saints seem to be. They have a lot more work done outwardly on Jackson Dart than Shedeur Sanders. And again, another few bits of information that I've kind of picked up on is they have 6 picks in the top 130. So they actually have a lot of draft capital to work with here. So they have options in terms of possibly not having to pay that quarterback tax that you hear about in the draft. Cam Ward is the clear consensus number 1 quarterback, and by all accounts, there's a big drop off in terms of ability after that. So there seems to be a lot better players available, or there should be a lot better players available in their position. So I think the Saints have an opportunity here to address a need at defensive tackle. You're looking at Mason Graham, Derek Harmon, Walter Nolan, Kenneth Grant, one of those guys, and then they may have the option to trade back. They can sit back then and watch what happens in terms of quarterbacks, because by the looks of it, they may be happy enough if they end up with Shedeur Sanders, even Tyler Shue. Going back to Brian's point, there's an option of potentially looking at a trade for Kirk Cousins on the table towards the end of that round, and coming back into the first round, or sorting out their quarterback need later on. I think they're one of these teams that they have a lot of options here in this first round. But I do, if I'm betting now, I think it's going to be defensive tackle.
The Carolina Panthers, Kieran Boyle, are off a season where they conceded an NFL record 534 points. They shipped Brian Burns out the door, didn't get anywhere near the haul they might have got from had they listened to Sense a couple of years before that. But since when did the Carolina Panthers ever listen to Sense? That's why they are where they are. They need a lot of help defensively, clearly. They could have a Jihad Campbell or a Jalen Walker fall to them in this position, or they could decide to maybe go offense and throw a Tater O McMillan or a bit of a wild card into the picture there and get a little bit more help for the quarterback. So there's a lot of different things that the Panthers could do. Like I said, they've a lot of spots to fill on that roster. What do you think they will do?
Well, I think they're going to go edge. I think it's going to be one of these top players that's going in the very early stages of the draft. I got James Pierce, local kid out of Charlotte, 6'5", 243, played really good with Tennessee. He's got all the stuff that you need out of an edge. The only thing he doesn't have is outstanding stats. But I mean, I think a lot of these teams are kind of, hedging their bets and kind of hoping that, by year 2 he starts producing. But this was a Tennessee team that he was on that only gave up they gave up over 20 points or under 20 points in 12 of the games. I'm sorry. So this was a defense kind of very stout that was led by him. And he is a junior, so he's only played a couple of years. But this is a guy with real talent that's ready to start performing and really showing this kind of team what he's got. He's got some character issues, like a lot of these kids. They get into trouble, and Abdul Carter. We can talk about that later on, but they need somebody at edge. They need somebody to make a statement on defense, because this is a team. I don't want to call them soft, but they've been labeled as easy to play against quite a lot. So they need somebody to put the stamp on it, put the foot down, and start making some plays on defense and start intimidating, offenses.
Brian, on the green side of New York, the Jets, widely tipped to be looking offensive line, get a little bit of protection around Justin Fields, their new man under center. Not that he's going to stay much of his time under center, knowing Justin Fields. Is Armand Membu their man, or you had suggested that they might go tight end and we could see Colson Loveland come off the board in this position?
I think if they go tight end, I think it'll be Tyler Warren. I don't think Tyler Warren will go in the first 6 selections because of the needs of other teams. It's interesting because Membu seemed to be the general consensus pick over the course of the last 2 to 3 weeks. And even if you look at QuinnBet's odds today, and you touched on it earlier in terms of the movement of lines and how interesting it is to see on the week of the draft, he was locked in even money with QuinnBet to be the selection for the Jets. He's now 7-4. It's nearly 2-1. And the odds have come in for Tyler Warren. And once we get to this week, they all seem to adjust based on the general consensus coming out. It seems to be
the
moving
one
in that general
overarching
direction.
thought, Brian, if you're looking for a galvanizing thought for this draft, is that it's a fairly weak class overall. So, which makes it kind of unpredictable. You're down to maybe a handful of people who are consensus difference makers, and that would include difference makers, I should say, Travis Hunter, Ashton Genty, Tyler Warren, who's at the top of most people's big boards in terms of what he can do and the variety of things that he can do for you, just as a pure football player. But nobody's jumping up and down, as I was saying earlier, about you're going to absolutely nail a starting offensive lineman here. You can absolutely nail down a cornerback here. You can absolutely nail down a wide receiver in the way that we saw so many of the guys who went in the first round last year, probably unusually even for a draft class that was wildly touted as being very wide receiver heavy. Most of those guys came out and were absolutely as advertised. Nobody seems to be having the same warm and fuzzy feeling about this draft class overall, and that makes it very unpredictable.
No, but when they do kind of press them to say who is the nearest thing in terms of from an offensive line perspective, you touched on it earlier, Campbell and Membu seem to be the general consensus of they're the two leading lights, and the ones there's a bit of a drop off thereafter. The Jets should really select the offensive line, but I wonder with a new head coach and a new GM, do they want to put a statement down and give the fans something that they haven't had for some time, which is an exciting tight end, because it's been quite some time since we've seen the Jets with someone in that manner. So I will go Warren, but it won't surprise me, the offensive line. Can I just jump back to the Panthers? Because obviously our mock drafts are going to go out this week. I have the Giants trading with the Panthers, Connor. I think Dan Morgan, GM, and Joe Shane are very good friends, and I wonder, is there a deal in the offing? Because the amount of work that was done over the course of last week, flying out to Boulder, again, a week before the draft, you wonder, look, they're not going to go quarterback at 3. You wonder, is there a deal in place for them to move back up? And when you look at the teams, likely who could trade out, who need more, as you touched on, to get back challenging within the NFC South, it's the Panthers. So I wouldn't be surprised if they move out. In terms of the Jets, I'll go tight end. Won't be surprised if it's offensive line.
But as you say, I mean, the Giants, as has been widely rumored, made a big play to try and trade with the Titans to get the number 1 overall pick to go for Cam Ward, right? So that's the guy they liked at quarterback. Most people are saying that none of the quarterbacks touted to go in the first round outside of Cam Ward would have even made the top 6 or 7 quarterbacks taken last year. So again, nobody's getting particularly excited about this quarterback class. So it's hardly a surprise if the Giants aren't going to use that pick for a quarterback. If they're not as hot on Abdul Carter as some people were suggesting they might do, then that makes a lot of sense to me, I have to say.
Yeah, but see, the pressure's on to bring in a quarterback, but we haven't hit the Giants yet. We're still in New York. We're in Florham Park, but maybe we'll come back to that at 3.
Quick point of the Jets. I think what was the biggest problem the Jets had last year was stopping the run. Who was great at stopping the run in college? Mason Graham. I think I would keep an eye out for him in the pick. I don't think Warren will be there at 7 for the Jets. I think this guy is red hot right now. I think teams are going to clamor over themselves to get him. But again, we'll talk about that as we get closer to 1. But I have a feeling the Jets are going to go with that. It's not going to be the sexy pick. The Jets don't often make sexy picks in the first round. But I think that's a guy. I mean, 45 tackles, 7 tackles for loss. He's just a monster. If you see him playing, he's just a wall, and he just runs people over. And between, if you put him up and put him there with Quinn and Williams in the middle, that's going to help the Jets a lot. Probably more so than a tight end who's going to have Justin Fields not throwing to him.
I didn't think that the Jets had done anything sexy since Broadway Joe had that fur coat. Like that, the younger fans can look that one up. That's an experience in and of itself. The Raiders, speaking of sexy, Shane, picking at number 6. Ashton Genty all day long, but maybe not. The betting line has moved interestingly on Genty in the past couple of days. Some people suggesting he could go at 5, and we'll get to the Jacksonville Jaguars momentarily. Other people suggesting, as Kieran Boyle was saying earlier, maybe he'll fall down the board.
Yeah, it's an interesting one, I think, between Genty and, of course, Shedeur, because as we're watching this live on Thursday night, there is a potential that Shedeur could still be in play by the time we get to number 6. I think a lot of the talk in the build-up, not so much this week, but beforehand, was probably putting the Raiders in that mix to try and find a way to either be a player in somebody trading up to get Shedeur or for picking him if he's still available by the time we get to 6. And I think the same can be said for Ashton Genty, because I think the Raiders are coming into this.
Nothing would surprise any of us with Shedeur. He might end up turning up in the conclave to be the new pope at this stage. Like, he could be anywhere.
Yeah, very much. I mean, there's people suggesting he could slip down to mid-20s, which I don't think will happen. I have heard an argument over the course of the last couple of weeks that you look at the way that Josh is Spytek Spitic, the general manager, who has been at the Tampa Bay Buccaneers for the last decade.
Spygate, Shane. Spygate.
No, that's the other guy. I'll get to him in a second. But you look at the way that the general manager has basically run things in Tampa Bay for the last couple of years. And what have they done? They've usually survived and thrived with 2 or 3 mid-draft running backs. They bolstered the offensive line and found another way to spread the wealth. You look at the other guy that you were referring to, which I will not use your thing, Tom Brady, who is in the decision-making room. What have the Patriots been able to do, and the Buccaneers? Bolster the offensive line, have a couple of running backs they can spread the love to, and try to move it forward. You look at that form and you say, are they really going to use their first rounder on Ashton Genty if it's still available at 6, which I expect he will be? If I'm honest, yes, because what the Raiders need, Raiders' run game last year was terrible. I think it was 30th in the league when it comes to yards gained. I think if Ashton Genty is there, I think they're 100% going to do their utmost to take him. But look, that doesn't mean he's going to be there. We can talk about what the Jaguars do later on in the program. But I definitely think that taking that skilled player, taking that somebody who could change the game more so than just going for an O-line pick is something that the Raiders are likely to do here.
Right, as we break into the top 5, Brian, you wanted to say something, sorry, before we move on.
Pete Carroll, beast mode, that kind of familiarity with Genty, that kind of strikes me as something. He likes to run the ball effectively. It just
except when it matters most.
With a minute to go in a Super Bowl, he is, unfortunately for a lot of us on that particular night, who are extremely disappointed with that play call. But look, this seems to be kind of the narrative that's out there. Here we go. Seems to be the narrative that's out there that he wants a running back. He wants to get back to that style of football, and he's familiar with Geno Smith as well. So bring it all back together in terms of how he would have ran the Seahawks, bring in a running back.
Kieran O'Donovan at 5, the Jacksonville Jaguars. Again, the closer it gets to the draft, the less certainty there seems to be about what they will do. While it looked nailed on that they would go for a D lineman and Mason Graham was being the name most closely linked, that may or may not be the way it pans out on the night.
Yeah, again, I'm looking at what's the most obvious need, and Pro Football Focus had the Jaguars pass rush ranked 32nd in the league. It's rock bottom. So I actually looked at outside linebacker, and again, I might have slipped up doing my homework. I found an article that had Jihad Campbell, ranked higher than Jalen Walker, and so I have him in my draft here, in my mock draft, but I think it may even be Jalen Walker. Look, I think it'll be on the defensive side of the ball regardless. If you're a Jags fan, what do you want to do? Okay, you want to support they've invested heavily in Trevor Lawrence. You want to support him. They've given him a stud weapon in Brian Thomas Jr. last year. He was my one shining light on in my fantasy football team. They're not that badly stuck in terms of weapons on offense. So how do you support Trevor Lawrence this year? And by the way, their offensive line isn't ranked too low either in the league. So how do you support Trevor Lawrence? You give him the opportunity to get short fields. You give him more time on the field. So what you want is somebody who can disrupt be that with a pass rush, with an interception, just with pressures, you just increase that opportunity to give Trevor Lawrence that short field. And if I could just make a quick point as well on Jeanty, there's been a little bit of talk, there's been a good bit of talk tonight on Ashton Jeanty, and maybe look, I'm the last person who professed to be anyway knowledgeable about college football, but we talk about the best player available, and we talk about these players that are hyped. I agree with you that from what I'm hearing, this is quite a poor class in terms of quality. Besides Cam Ward, the one player that I keep hearing more and more hype about is Ashton Jeanty. And I think Saquon Barkley reset the focus on the running back and the importance of the running back. And I'm always waxing lyrical about Derrick Henry and what he means to his team as well. So I think, like, if he falls to the Patriots at 4, is there no chance that they go for him and say, you know, will we look at this as a missed opportunity if we don't take this guy? If he turns out to be the next Saquon Barkley and we could have had him, you know, will the Patriots actually let him slip by when they're not setting the world on fire at running back at the moment? So is there, you know, I'd like to hear Shane's take on it, or even Kieran, who's got his eye more on the college football. Is there a chance that he goes top 5, Jeanty, and even within the top 4?
I think.
Let's bring you in on that very point.
Well, I think a lot of GMs are gun shy about taking running backs in the top 5, even the top 10. I think it's a great position. It's a valuable position, but I think a lot of them kind of focus on the big boys and how they can fix those holes quicker. I mean, running back's almost seen as a bit of a luxury. I think Jeanty's, I don't think he's going to fall, but I think he's not going to go as high as people think. I think there's going to be a little bit, you know, once the dust starts settling after the first couple of picks, I think GMs are going to be like, all right, you know, let's see how this plays out. Are all the edges going to go? We still need an edge. And he may be seen as more of a luxury. For me, the Jags,
there are a lot of decent running backs available in this draft, though, by the looks of it, Kieran. It seems to be one position that there is 100%. Broad agreement that you can do reasonably well here. And I'm thinking when you say about GMs and running backs, I remember the Lions getting ripped for taking Jahmyr Gibbs in the top 10, which actually worked out brilliantly.
It doesn't always, he's probably one of the exceptions along with Saquon. You know, there are a lot of good running backs in this draft, and some of them may go in the later parts of the first round or even the second. You know, the 2 guys from Ohio State, you got Omarion Hampton and obviously Jensen. But I think, you know, just being obviously there's a lot of talk locally about who the Jags are going to take and all the surmising. I really think that Tyler Warren's going to end up in Jacksonville for a variety of reasons. You got the new ownership, or the new GM and the new coach are desperate to make a splash in Jacksonville. What they should take is probably Mason Graham or somebody of that ilk, or even a big horse in the front, because their O-line is they lost some people in the O-line, and they addressed that a little bit in free agency, and they'll probably do that later on in the round. But this guy I've been talking about him for months. He is a phenomenal athlete. He is a Jeremy Shockey. He's a Jimmy Graham. He's a Kyle Rudolph kind of player. He's enormous. He's strong. And he's somebody that will excite the Jacksonville fans. I mean, Cohen and Gladstone need to make a splash early and bring excitement back to the team. It was a damn squib last year.
They play this guy out of the Wildcat at times, right? He can do a lot of things on the football team. He's very exciting. He's
phenomenally talented. I mean, the one thing he doesn't have, and it's probably more of an indictment of tight ends in today's league, he's not a great blocker. But, I mean, he's essentially another wide receiver. Now, you've already lost Evan Engram, so you need a tight end already. And, I think Gabe Davis is a little bit out of favor. You need somebody out there to help. This is a pivotal year for Lawrence. You need to give him weapons out there. And I think somebody like Warren would be a great weapon to add to somebody like Parker Washington, Brian Thomas Jr., obviously. And I know they got De'Ami Brown in free agency. But, Jacksonville, the Jags desperately need somebody to kind of rally around and for somebody to get the fan base excited. A D tackle won't do that, but somebody like him will do it. And it's like I said, Trevor Lawrence needs studs around him. It's a pivotal year. He can't make the excuses that it was Urban Meyer or the injuries or the fumbles. He's got to start making things happen in Jacksonville. I think Tyler Warren is a great fit for the Jags. And I know that, tight end, you may not think somebody like that would go top 5, but this guy is phenomenal. I'm not going to use any of those, generational talents kind of phrases that people throw about all the time. But from watching him at Penn State, just a great player, just phenomenal athlete. And a leader, too, which is something that they need.
Tell us what the Patriots are going to do at 4, Kieran, before we move on to Brian and his New York Giants, and your New York Giants for that matter.
Well, for me, I think this is when the draft starts kind of leveling out and it kind of reverts to chalk. I think we're all kind of, consensus is that they're going to go Will Campbell. They're going to go tackle to protect Drake May. This is probably the biggest tackle in the whole draft. I mean, he's almost 6'7", and he's 330 pounds, and he's probably going to bulk up. You could probably add another 15 pounds by the time he gets into the league. He's going to be eating a lot in the spring. But he's just he's a kind of guy that is vital. He's somebody that the Patriots can build that O-line around. Physically, he's like Armand Membou. He ran a sub 5 second 40, which is ridiculous for a guy of his size. Started all 12 games last year at left tackle. Blocked like crazy.
What I'm hearing is, you see this guy coming, you better clear a line to the rib shack. Do not get in this guy's way at the burrito.
Exactly. He can pick up blitzes. He's great in the B gap, but he can also cover the A gap. He can always get around in there. Pulling tackle. I've seen him as a pulling tackle. There's nothing he can't do. And he's battle tested in the SEC, which we know is the standard bearer in college. He keeps his feet moving. Excellent reader of the ball. It's there. We talk about it being a weak draft. It is a weak draft in certain areas, but on both sides of the line, there's a lot of strength and a lot of guys who are going to be ready in year one. They talked about his hand size and arm size in the combine and pro day. That talk rapidly disappeared when the closer you get to the draft, when the serious talk needs to start. But he's going to be the anchor for the Pats O-line for another 10 years to come. I can't see anyone except for Will Campbell going to the Pats.
Brian at 3, the Giants. All the analysts say best player available will be Abdul Carter at that point. But is Shedeur the man for the G-men?
Yeah, well, I think they're in a fortunate position that it's Hunter or Carter being realistic about it, and whenever one falls in the domino, they'll take that player. But at this stage, it looks like Hunter's a foregone conclusion to go to the Browns. I think Carter is. Yeah, I think the Giants need to go back to get the identity back. There's been so much focus over the last 3 or 4 years on the quarterback situation. Continuous offensive scrutiny because the head coach is an offensive-minded guy. But we've seen the Giants win Super Bowls and be really effective as a team when they've had a great defense, when they've had a clamor of players up front. You go back to the last Super Bowl victory, JPP, Justin Tuck, the previous Kiwanuka, Michael Strahan, and numerous players that could get to the quarterback. And that's what they're going to have when they take Carter. They're going to have him, Brian Burns, and Thibodeau if he comes back and has a good season. And I had someone say to me last week, do you really need to have a flashy quarterback? I mean, the Ravens won a Super Bowl in Super Bowl 35 against the Giants with a really effective defense and Trent Dilfer as their quarterback. Why can't the Giants not get back to the playoffs and be competitive again with Russell Wilson as quarterback, like what he did in Pittsburgh? And the Giants have an identity as a defensive team next year, and that's where it's going. But I do genuinely believe they will find a way back into the first round to pick up a quarterback as well. But it's a no-brainer. Kieran's doesn't want to use the word generational talent, but him and Hunter seem to be the two players, general consensus, that are those players. And if it wasn't for a team needing a quarterback in the Titans, that one of those other guys would be going at 1. And it looks like Carter for the Giants. I think the Giants will be thankful in the end that they are in the 3 spot and they get this player.
Shane, the Cleveland Browns have a top 50 pick for the first time since 2018. But before we get to that, what do you think the Patriots are going to do? I meant to come to you when we were talking Pats. Apologies.
It's all good. I'll save some of the stuff I know Kieran was asking about Ashton Shanty. I'm sure we'll have plenty of time on Thursday to get into the permutations. Just a quick one on the Patriots, though. I definitely think that there is a growing sense that if Travis Hunter and Abdul Carter are taking a 2 and 3, the Patriots will find a way to try and trade out a 4. The Patriots have consistently, and they even said this in one of the last year's draft and didn't get it done, they've consistently tried to find ways to trade down and build up their book stock. Now, unfortunately, the way that this year's draft is going is that there are more sellers than buyers when it comes to trying to trade up and take those big names in the top of the draft. So I definitely think the Patriots are sitting and maybe trying to find a way to flog off that number 4 pick if they can. If they do stick with it, I think Will Campbell is the right decision for every reason that Kieran made. And I definitely think, just to get back to Kieran's point, that as much as there's growing hype around Ashton Genty, the Patriots aren't going to take away from the greatest buzzword that's been going around Foxborough, which is Drake May, Drake May, Drake May. You either protect him or you give him to someone to throw to, and that's it. You're not going to find a running back who's going to take the ball out of his hands. That's just not what the Patriots are going to do in this draft. And we're coming into we have a head coach there who drafted Skoronski a couple of years ago. He's an O-line type of guy. So yeah, that's my 2 cents to the Patriots. In terms of the Browns, I think you were asking about that, Connor. Look, when we convened here last week and when we've been talking, it became clear and clear that Cam Ward is going to be number one, and there wasn't much conversation around that. I think we're at that point now.
Spoiler alert, Kieran O'Donovan looks so downcast now. You're after stealing his thunder.
Well, maybe, I don't know. Maybe there could be, Jackson Dart could be number one for all we know. There could still be a twist in the tail. But I think the same is happening with Travis Hunter, because he is just the best player in the league. And the Browns, I think, are smart enough to know that if they're going to bring him in, they're not going to waste him and just using him as a wide receiver or cornerback. They want to figure out what's the best way to use this guy and see if he's the right playmaker in the toughest division in the National Football League. So, if Travis Hunter, Heisman Trophy winner, is sitting there number 2, which he more than likely will be, they're going to take him. They're not even going to consider Abdul Carter as much as I thought that they would originally.
Brian, you were going to make a point on Travis Hunter.
No, I'll let Kieran jump in first. I think Kieran has something on Hunter as well. I'll double down on that afterwards. Sorry.
I've spoken about it in the past, the Dion factor. I think the closer we get to the draft, the more we're going to see teams shying away and being not repulsed, but being, walking the other way from the Dion drama. I mean, over the weekend they retired jerseys of Travis Hunter and Shedeur Sanders. Say about that what you will. But I mean, that's the Dion factor right there. And if you even though it's not his kid, if you're drafting Hunter, you're going to be taking a lot of that Dion kind of talk with you. He's going to be chirping on national television, or he's going to be doing something talking about the head coach Stefanski, or he'll find some way of chirping. So you got to realize that even though it's not Shedeur you're taking, you're still taking a lot of that Colorado kind of Dion stuff on board too. On the plus side, he's a hell of an athlete, but I think he's going to be used more if he gets taken by the Browns at 2. I think his days as a corner are going to be very few, because a variety of reasons. Cornerback's the hardest position to play in the NFL by far. He's undersized. He's less than 200 pounds. He slayed. He absolutely did phenomenal work last year and the year before, and even with Jackson State playing a corner. But now you're going up in the NFL. You're going up another level. I think he's going to be primarily used as a wide receiver. Phenomenal athlete, a wide receiver. Great, but all the things you need from a wide receiver. Not overly tall. He's only 6'1", so he's not a rangy guy, but he's got great hands and he's athletic as hell. But a lot of the talk was that he's going to play wide and he's going to play corner. I don't think that's going to happen at all. I think he's going to play a couple of snaps here and there on corner, but he's going to be primarily used as a wide receiver. And is that what the Browns need, number 2? That's my question. But it's also, I mean, again, you're not going up against Kansas or Texas Tech or Wyoming or West Virginia. You're going up against prime NFL teams. And I don't think that the corner act is going to work in the league. So combine that with the Dion kind of bandwagon that you're going to be hitching with your team. Is that somebody that the Browns need? Is that the noise they want around them? And is Hunter's ability and skill going to drown out Dion's noise?
Connor, it's not too far off the mark. He made a statement a couple of weeks ago, but it only seemed to get reported last week. It was suggested as if he said it last week. I think this one's been floating for a few weeks, and I think it's because of the Deion Sanders factor with his son and stuff. But he suggested that if he can't play both positions over the course of the season, he won't be happy with the team which he selected. Like if that was a different year and there wasn't Deion Sanders, that for me would be a red herring for a lot of teams. That has to be a concern. Like, would you not rather have a player 100% committed to playing cornerback or wide receiver, whatever direction the Browns want to go with him, and get the best out of him, than have a player that needs to be in 2 rooms essentially during the week, because he's got to be in the offensive plan. He's got to have a package of 14, 15 players.
It speaks to, and I know you were talking to, sorry, his name's gone out of my head, the Giants beat writer, and with Chris. You really interesting conversation with Chris, who I thought between the two of you seem to have really good take on this, which is, yeah, you put him in for certain packages, but he can't be sitting in offensive and defensive meetings. There's a little bit of naivety there in thinking that playing on either side of the ball in the NFL is anything other than 10 times more complicated than it is playing those same positions in the college, and the play design, particularly in some of the more sophisticated offenses, particularly in a sort of Kevin Stefanski offense, it's going to be a lot to learn. Well, him
talking about that, that's Dion right there. That's Dion in the background chirping in his right ear, saying, "You can do everything, kid. You can go. You can play everywhere. You can play quarterback if you want." That's the Dion factor.
Yeah, but Dion did it 20-odd years ago. It's a totally different world in the NFL. Anyway, far be it from me to tell Deion Sanders anything.
Yeah, and just sorry, I think it's interesting. It's very much signifies where the Browns are, because the Browns probably feel they can play him as a wide receiver as opposed to cornerback, because we're only 2 years removed from this team having a stellar defense in the playoffs. And, when they made the playoffs, but predominantly because they had number one defense in the league. Last year wasn't the case. They had a lot of injuries and stuff. But they obviously feel they're comfortable enough at defensively that they can play him as a wide receiver. If he lands in with the Giants, I'd imagine the Giants would focus in on him being a cornerback as opposed to a wide receiver and then package it up with Dable. But again, it kind of talks to where a team is in terms of what the position of need is for them. But we're coming to number one, which is probably the most obvious pick. I'll step away now.
Kieran O'Donovan, you've been sitting patiently waiting for us to finally get to that number one overall pick, where the Tennessee Titans would be shocking the world if they didn't pick Cam Ward. He's plus 20,000 with the bookies to go in that position, which makes him 200 to 1 on.
Yeah, well, I want to thank you for putting me in this position, because I think you said, look, we'll give Kieran a chance to get one right anyway. So yeah, thanks for that. Look, it's going to be Cam Ward. That's just simply what's going to happen. They're taking a quarterback. They're taking Cam Ward. They canceled their workout with Shedeur Sanders, so it's not to waste his time. In their own words, they held a private workout and they sent absolutely everybody they could to Miami for the pro day, including their own in-house camera team. I think that says as much as it needs to say. Look, I suppose if I'm to give any 2 cents on it, the one thing I would say is it does highlight the frustrating part of the draft for that. You call it a generational talent. I mean, he's going to go into a really messy situation in Tennessee, where they've got one of the worst offensive lines. He's throwing the ball to Calvin Ridley, I think the wide receiver number one at the moment. Pretty average in terms of a wide receiver, below average for a WR1. It's going to probably be a tough year or two for Cam Ward, and all I'd say is that you just hope that Brian Callahan is given the time to build around him, and it's next year and the year after the important years for his development. Look, just to come back, and I know guys might come in on Cam Ward, but just to go back and double down or triple down on what Brian and Kieran were saying. I heard that comment from Travis Hunter during the week, and whether he proves everybody wrong or whether he proves he's capable of playing both ways with two full packages or not, I think that's irrelevant for me. If you're a GM, if you're a coach, all you want to hear from your potential or your prospective draft player is, I just want to do what's best for the team. That's all you want to hear a player saying. I'm going to come in here. I'm going to work as hard as I can. I'm going to listen to my coach, and I'm going to do what's best for the team, and go in behind closed doors and then make your case. If you're coming out in public before you're even drafted, and I agree, there's an element of Dion in that. It's a huge red flag for me. It's a huge. They must be sitting there thinking, God, what kind of headaches are we going to have this year if we decide, we only want him to play to play wide receiver and maybe with a small package for cornerback. Is that going to be enough? So I think there's drama down the line for Cleveland. But yeah, Tennessee, Cam Ward, number one.
Kieran Boyle, point on Cam.
Yeah, I mean, this guy has been touted. I watch a lot of being in Florida. I watched a lot of Miami football. I mean, this is a guy touted as being the best quarterback prospect in the draft, which is, again, we can talk about the merits or whatever of quarterbacks that are available this year. This guy is a gunslinger. This is he can do those Mahomes kind of sideways throws, but he reminds me a lot of Brett Favre. Gunslinger, he can throw the ball 70, 75 yards, but he can get picked off quite a lot too. He scrambles, despite the fact that he was behind a huge O-line in Miami. Each one of those guys in front of him were 330, 340, and at least 6'4". I mean, that was an enormous. So he's got that. That's what made him look good last year. The other thing that made him look good is he had some real studs at wide receiver. He had Elijah Arroyo and he had Xavier Restrepo. Restrepo was probably going to be a third rounder. Arroyo, you're probably not till Saturday you won't hear his name. But those are the two factors that have pushed him up to where he is. That and the kind of deficit on the rest of the quarterbacks. But he's a gunslinger. He's exciting to watch, and he can throw the ball an absolute mile, and he scrambles pretty good. But something that stood out to me, and this is something that is. I don't know if it's registered much with GMs. Last year, he only completed 39% of his passes inside the red zone. Now, to me, that's a red flag. To me, that's a huge area of concern. But that just shows you the ability he has with his legs, and that just shows you, the ability he has in the rest of the field. But when it comes down to the crunch time, is he able to make those throws instead of running the ball in? So that's something to pause for thought. But he did benefit from a lot of things at Miami. A kind of very stout offense and a lot of weapons around him. So I don't think he's going to make much of an impact at all in the NFL. I mean, I know he's going number one. He's going to the Titans, like Kieran said. You know, we got Calvin Ridley, a couple other people right now, unless they start doing some work in the later rounds of the draft. But I don't really see a lot coming out of him. I think it's going to be a tough couple of years for him, similar to in Carolina. The name's slipping me right now, the quarterback, but it's going to be something similar to that. It's going to be a very steep learning curve.
Bryce Young.
Bryce Young. I'm sorry. There you go. It's going to be a similar situation to that, where highly touted quarterback coming out that was blessed with a huge amount of weapons and a lot of things in his favor, and then when they weren't around him, when he got into the cold light of day in the NFL, was almost found out. So I think it's going to be a tough year for Cam Ward next year, maybe even the year after. But I mean, there's no doubt at this stage that he's going to go number one.
Well, speaking of gunslingers, we got our own 4 gunslingers shooting it up on Thursday. I should say, on Thursday. That's a very unfortunate reference. Scrub that from the record. Buskers on the Ball and Temple Bar will be counting you down through the first round from 1 a.m. Tune in for that one, and we'll see who's on the money and who's firing blanks as we go live in line with the draft from Green Bay, Wisconsin. 1 a.m. from Buskers on the Ball in Dublin on Thursday. Until then, take care.